The conference hall on Kepler 7 station stretched wider than 3 football fields, with a ceiling that seemed to touch the stars themselves. Katie Sullivan sat in the human delegation section, trying not to look too overwhelmed by the sheer variety of alien species surrounding her. There were beings made of crystalline structures that hummed with inner light, floating jellyfish-like creatures that communicated through color changes, and the massive Vorkath engineers who looked like they could crush a car with their bare hands. She adjusted her tablet and tried to focus on the presentation. This was her first Galactic Engineering Summit, and Earth had only been invited because they'd finally achieved stable warp travel 5 years ago. Most species here had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. Katie felt like a kindergartner who'd been invited to a university lecture. On stage, the Vorkath Forge Master Krenthvar was explaining the current limitations in military ship construction. His voice boomed through the translation devices everyone wore. "The problem remains unsolved," he said, his forearms gesturing at holographic displays showing melted metal and failed containment systems. Plasma weapons generate temperatures exceeding 15,000 degrees. No material can withstand direct contact with such energy. Even our finest stellar alloys fail within seconds. Katie leaned forward, suddenly interested. She'd worked on similar problems back on Earth, though admittedly at a much smaller scale. Krenthvar continued, "We use magnetic fields and sacrificial plating, yes, but these are temporary solutions. The material still fails. It melts, it cracks, it becomes useless. We need something better. But after 2,000 years of research, we must accept that perhaps some problems have no solutions." A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. The Vorkath were considered the masters of metallurgy and material science in the known galaxy. If they said something was impossible, most species accepted it as fact. Katie's hand went up before she could stop herself. The moderator, a floating lumen whose body glowed soft blue, seemed surprised. "The human delegate has a question?" Every eye, sensor, and visual organ in the massive hall turned toward Katie. Her mouth went dry. What was she doing? These were species that had forgotten more about engineering than Earth had ever learned. But she'd already raised her hand, and now hundreds of aliens were staring at her. She stood up, her legs feeling shaky. Excuse me. I don't mean to be rude, but humans have been containing plasma for decades. We use it for cooking food." Silence fell across the hall. Then, like a wave, confusion rippled through the crowd. Translators buzzed and chirped as delegates tried to make sense of what she'd said. Krenthvar's large eyes narrowed. "Cooking? You claim to solve a problem that has plagued galactic engineering for millennia, and you use it for preparing nutrition?" Katie felt her face getting hot, but she pressed on.
"Yes, sir."
"We have portable devices that generate plasma for cutting metal in construction sites. We have laboratory equipment that uses plasma for medical purposes. And yes, we also have grills that use plasma to cook steaks." A delegate from the insectoid Chithar species clicked loudly, which the translator interpreted as laughter. Others joined in. Katie heard the words primitive and misunderstanding floating through various translation streams. Krenthvar raised one massive hand, and silence returned. But his expression wasn't amused. It was insulted. "Human delegate, the Vorkath have been forging materials since before your species discovered fire. We have tested every known element and combination. We have created alloys that can withstand the heart of stars. And you dare suggest that we have overlooked something so simple that you use it for food preparation?" Katie's embarrassment transformed into something else. Determination, maybe, or stubbornness. Her father always said she had too much of that. "I'm not suggesting you overlooked anything, sir. I'm saying we might have approached the problem differently. Different perspectives can lead to different solutions." Krenthvar descended from the stage, his heavy footsteps making the floor vibrate. He was easily 3 times Katie's height, and his presence was intimidating. But Katie held her ground. "Very well, human," he said, his voice dropping to a growl that the translator barely picked up. "I challenge you to demonstrate this miraculous technology. You will have access to our fabrication laboratories. You may use any materials you wish. 3 days. If you can show us this plasma containment you speak of, the Vorkath will publicly acknowledge human engineering capability. But when you fail, your species will admit that you spoke from ignorance and arrogance." Katie swallowed hard. 3 days. She'd just committed Earth's reputation to a challenge against the galaxy's most respected engineers. Her supervisor back home was going to kill her. but she nodded. I accept your challenge, Forge Master. The hall erupted in excited chatter. The moderator struggled to restore order. Katie sat down, her hands trembling slightly. Danny Pierce, her colleague from the Materials Division, leaned over from the next seat. Katie, what the hell did you just do? He whispered urgently. I have no idea, she admitted, but we do have plasma containment technology. It works. I've seen it work thousands of times. In controlled laboratory settings, Danny hissed. Not in front of the entire galactic community with Earth's reputation on the line. Then I guess we'd better make sure it works here too, Katie said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. After the session ended, Katie was immediately surrounded by delegates. Some were curious, asking questions about human technology. Others seemed skeptical, making comments that the translators interpreted as various forms of doubt. A few were hostile, suggesting that humanity was trying to gain attention through wild claims. Through the crowd, Katie spotted Lieutenant Commander Amy Brooks from Earth's delegation pushing her way forward. Amy was their military liaison, a sharp woman who'd served on 3 deep space missions. We need to talk, Amy said, pulling Katie away from the crowd. Now. They found a quiet observation deck overlooking the station's docking bay. Ships of every imaginable design came and went, from sleek Zentari diplomatic vessels to massive Korvax warships. Do you actually know how to do this? Amy asked directly. Katie pulled up her tablet and started scrolling through files. Yes, we use ceramic composites, refractory materials, and controlled ablation. It's not magic. It's just engineering that these species haven't explored because they've been focused on making materials stronger, rather than making them fail in predictable ways. Amy studied her for a long moment. You realize that if this works, it changes everything. Plasma weapons that don't destroy their own firing mechanisms, fusion reactors that are actually practical, medical tools that can cut with precision. This isn't just about proving a point. I know, Katie said quietly. That's why we have to get it right. Amy nodded slowly. Okay, I'll help. And I'll get Danny on board officially. 3 days isn't much time. But if anyone can pull off the impossible, it's usually humans too stupid to know when to quit. Katie laughed despite her nerves. Is that supposed to be encouraging? It's the best I've got, Amy said with a slight smile. Now let's go requisition some materials and show these aliens how we cook steak. As they walked back toward the delegation quarters, Katie looked out at the stars beyond the station. Somewhere out there was Earth, home to 8 billion people who had no idea that their entire species' reputation now rested on whether one engineer could successfully demonstrate something as simple as a camping grill. No pressure at all. The fabrication laboratory assigned to Katie's team was intimidating in its sophistication. Equipment that humanity had only dreamed about sat on every workbench. Molecular assemblers, gravitic forges, quantum-level measuring devices. Katie felt like a mechanic who'd been handed the keys to a spaceship factory. Danny Pierce whistled low as he examined a device that could apparently rearrange atomic structures. This is insane. They have technology here that wouldn't exist on Earth for another century. And yet they can't solve the plasma problem, Katie said, pulling up her materials list on the laboratory's interface. Sometimes having too many advanced tools makes you forget the simple solutions. Amy Brooks stood by the laboratory's observation window. Already a small crowd of alien observers had gathered outside, their various eyes and sensors trained on the humans. We've got an audience. Word spreads fast, apparently. Katie tried to ignore the watchers and focused on her requisition list. She input her requirements into the system: aluminum oxide, silicon carbide, zirconium dioxide, various clay minerals, and several common metallic elements. The system processed her request, then flagged it with what the translator interpreted as confusion. A holographic lumen attendant materialized beside her workstation. Human engineer, I must inquire about your material selections. These are extremely common substances. Are you certain you don't require more advanced compounds? We have access to neutronium alloys, crystallized dark matter matrices, quantum-locked polymers. Katie smiled politely. No, thank you. These materials will work fine. The attendant seemed uncertain but processed the order. Within an hour, containers of the requested materials arrived. Katie noticed that several Vorkath engineers in the observation area were taking notes, their massive heads tilted in what might have been curiosity or disdain. She couldn't tell which. All right, Katie said, rolling up her sleeves. Let's start with the basics. Danny, we need to create a ceramic composite using the aluminum oxide and silicon carbide. Amy, can you work on preparing the clay mixtures? I'll handle the refractory layering calculations. They worked through the first day with focused intensity. Katie mixed compounds that human engineers had been using for industrial applications for decades. She created ceramic matrices designed to withstand extreme temperatures through controlled ablation, rather than brute resistance. She layered materials with different thermal properties, creating gradients that would dissipate heat rather than trying to block it entirely. The alien observers seemed baffled. Through the window, Katie could see them conferring with each other, gesturing at the humans' work with obvious confusion. One Vorkath engineer actually pressed his face against the transparent barrier, watching as Katie hand-shaped a clay mixture into a simple crucible form. By the second day, more observers had arrived. The crowd outside the laboratory had grown to over 100 beings from dozens of species. News feeds across the station were apparently covering the challenge. Katie tried not to think about the pressure. Danny was working on a composite panel when he suddenly laughed. "Katie, come look at this." She walked over to his station. He'd created a small test piece and was heating it with a standard thermal lance. The material was glowing white-hot, but it wasn't melting. Instead, the outer layer was slowly ablating away, carrying the heat with it while the inner layers remained intact. "It's working exactly like it should," Danny said with a grin. "They're watching us use kindergarten chemistry to solve their impossible problem." "Don't get cocky yet," Katie warned, but she was smiling too. "We still need to demonstrate it with actual plasma, and that's a whole different level of energy." Amy had been quiet most of the day, but now she spoke up from her workstation. "Katie, we have a political problem." "What kind of problem?" "I've been monitoring the station's communication networks. There's a faction of Vorkath engineers who are pushing to have your demonstration declared invalid before it even happens. They're arguing that your methods are too primitive to be legitimate solutions to advanced engineering problems." Katie felt a flash of anger. "That's ridiculous. Engineering is engineering. It doesn't matter if the solution is simple or complex as long as it works." "I know that, and you know that," Amy said. "But they have pride invested in this. The Vorkath have built their entire cultural identity around being the best metallurgists and materials engineers in the galaxy. If a species that just invented warp drive shows them up, it damages that identity." Danny frowned. "So what do we do?" Katie thought for a moment, then walked to the observation window. She could see Krenthvar among the watchers, his massive form easy to spot. On impulse, she activated the intercom system. "Forge Master Krenthvar, would you like to come inside and observe more closely?" The crowd outside stirred. Krenthvar seemed surprised by the invitation, but after a moment he approached the laboratory entrance. The door cycled open, and he had to duck to fit through the human-sized doorway. Up close, Katie was reminded just how physically imposing the Vorkath were. Krenthvar's head nearly touched the ceiling, and each of his 4 arms was thicker than her torso. But his eyes showed intelligence and curiosity, not hostility. "You invite me to watch you work?" he rumbled. "Yes," Katie said simply. "Because this isn't about humans versus Vorkath. It's about solving a problem that affects everyone. You've been working on plasma containment for centuries. You understand the challenges better than anyone. I'd value your expertise." Krenthvar studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "Show me what you're doing." Katie led him to her main workstation, where she'd been assembling a cylindrical containment vessel. "The key is accepting that the material will fail," she explained. "We're not trying to create something that plasma can't damage. We're creating something that fails in a controlled, predictable way." She pointed to the layered structure. "This outer ceramic layer will ablate when exposed to plasma. As it breaks down, it carries heat away from the inner layers. The middle layer is a refractory composite that resists heat through its crystal structure. The inner layer is designed to dissipate thermal energy through controlled microfracturing. Each layer protects the next." Krenthvar leaned closer, his multiple eyes examining the construction. "But if it's constantly failing, it must be replaced frequently. That's impractical for most applications." "True," Katie agreed. "But that's why we use it in situations where temporary containment is acceptable. For plasma-cutting tools, each activation only lasts seconds. For certain types of reactors, the containment only needs to last through a controlled burn cycle. And even when replacement is needed, these materials are cheap and easy to manufacture." "Cheap," Krenthvar repeated, as if the word was foreign to him. "The Vorkath create materials to last forever. And that's valuable, Katie said sincerely. But sometimes you don't need forever. Sometimes you just need it to work long enough to do the job. Different problems need different solutions, Danny called out from across the laboratory. Katie, the plasma torch is ready for testing. Katie felt her heart rate increase. This was the real moment of truth. She'd brought a standard industrial plasma cutter from Earth Supplies, the kind used in shipyards and construction sites every day. It was nothing fancy, just a reliable tool that human workers had been using for decades. She picked up a sample plate of Vorketh stellar alloy that Krenthvar had provided. It was supposedly one of the strongest materials in known space, capable of withstanding temperatures that would vaporize most substances. May I? She asked, holding up the plate. Krenthvar gestured his approval. Katie activated the plasma cutter. A brilliant jet of superheated gas emerged, and she applied it to the Vorketh alloy. The material resisted for perhaps 2 seconds, then began to melt like butter under a blowtorch. Within 10 seconds, she'd cut completely through the plate. The observers outside pressed closer to the windows. Katie could hear their excited chatter even through the soundproofing. Now, she said, placing the cutter's nozzle into one of her ceramic-lined containment vessels. Watch this. She activated the plasma torch again, but this time directed it into the vessel. The plasma swirled inside the ceramic lining, its blue-white glow illuminating the laboratory. Katie held it there for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. The outer ceramic layer began to glow red, then white, and she could see the surface slowly ablating away. But the vessel held. The plasma remained contained. After a full minute, she deactivated the torch. The vessel was hot and damaged, but it hadn't failed catastrophically. It had done its job. The laboratory was silent. Then Krenthvar made a sound that the translator struggled to interpret. It finally settled on something close to wonder. It works, the Forge Master said quietly. By the ancient stars, it actually works. Katie set down the torch, her hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. There's one more thing I need to show you. The reason this all started. She walked to a storage container and pulled out something that made several of the alien observers gasp. It was a simple camping grill, the kind humans took on outdoor trips. Battery-powered, portable, unremarkable. This, Katie said, is how we cook steak. She activated the grill, and plasma elements glowed to life inside ceramic. The news traveled through Kepler 7 station faster than light itself seemed to move. Within hours of Katie's demonstration, every delegation at the summit was discussing the implications. The humans had solved a problem that had stumped galactic civilization for centuries, and they'd done it with materials so common that some species used them for construction waste. Katie found herself at the center of an unexpected storm. She'd been scheduled to present a formal report the following day, but the summit organizers moved it up immediately. The main conference hall was packed beyond capacity, with delegates standing in the aisles and overflowing into auxiliary viewing rooms. She stood at the podium, looking out at thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds, and felt completely out of her depth. But Danny and Amy sat in the front row, giving her encouraging nods. She took a breath and began. The key principle, Katie explained, pulling up holographic diagrams, is accepting failure as part of the design. Human engineers call this controlled ablation or sacrificial protection. Instead of trying to create a material that plasma cannot damage, we create materials that are damaged in predictable, useful ways. She walked the audience through the concepts: thermal gradients, ablative heat shields, refractory crystal structures, and composite layering, things that were standard knowledge in human engineering schools, but apparently revolutionary to species that had spent millennia trying to create invincible materials. A Zentari delegate raised a crystalline appendage. But surely this is wasteful. If materials must be constantly replaced, the resource cost is enormous. Not necessarily, Katie replied. These materials are abundant and easy to synthesize. Clay minerals exist on most planets. Ceramic composites can be manufactured with minimal energy. Compare that to the resource cost of producing exotic alloys or quantum-locked polymers. Sometimes simple and replaceable is more efficient than complex and permanent. The questions continued for over an hour. Some delegates were genuinely curious, asking detailed technical questions. Others seemed skeptical, probing for weaknesses in the approach. Katie answered as best she could, trying to strike a balance between confidence and humility. But not everyone in the hall was pleased. Thex Morn, a prominent Vorkath engineer and apparently Krenthvar's longtime rival, stood and addressed the assembly. His voice carried weight and authority. "I must express concern about the direction of this conversation," Thexmorn declared. "The Vorkath have led galactic materials science for 3,000 years. Our methods are proven, refined, and reliable. Now we are being asked to abandon this heritage in favor of primitive techniques from a species that has barely achieved interstellar travel. This is not progress. This is regression disguised as innovation." A murmur of agreement came from a section of Vorkath delegates. Katie felt her stomach tighten. She'd expected technical challenges, but this was becoming political. Krenthvar stood slowly. The hall quieted, waiting to hear from the Forge Master who had originally challenged Katie. "Thexmorn speaks of heritage and tradition," he said carefully. "These are valuable things, but he forgets the first principle that our ancestors taught us. The purpose of engineering is to solve problems, not to prove superiority." Thexmorn turned to face him. "You would abandon Vorkath methods so quickly? After one flashy demonstration?" "I would expand Vorkath methods," Krenthvar corrected. "The human approach does not invalidate our work. It complements it. Imagine combining our metallurgical expertise with their ceramic engineering. Imagine what we could create together." The hall erupted in debate. Some delegates supported Krenthvar's position. Others sided with Thexmorn. The moderator struggled to maintain order. Katie stood at the podium, uncertain what to do. Then something unexpected happened. A Korvax military officer approached the stage, flanked by 2 heavily armed guards. The Korvax were known as one of the most militant species in the galaxy, their empire built on conquest and military superiority. "Human Engineer Sullivan," the officer said formally, "I am Commander Vex Callis of the Korvax Imperial Fleet. I wish to discuss your technology in private. The Empire is prepared to offer significant compensation for exclusive access to your plasma containment methods." The hall went silent. Katie felt every eye turn toward her. The political implications were suddenly very clear. Plasma weapons that didn't destroy their own firing mechanisms would give the Korvax an enormous military advantage. She could practically see the calculations happening in delegates' minds as they considered how this would shift the balance of power. "I appreciate your interest, Commander," Katie said carefully, "but I'm not authorized to make any exclusive agreements on behalf of Earth. Any technology sharing would need to go through proper diplomatic channels." Vex Callis's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his eyes. "Of course. I'm certain we can reach an understanding. We will speak again." As the Korvax delegation departed, Amy caught Katie's eye and made a subtle gesture. They needed to talk, urgently. The session ended in chaos with delegates arguing among themselves while Katie was escorted back to the human quarters by station security. Amy and Danny were waiting there, along with Ambassador Helen Martinez, the head of Earth's delegation. "That got complicated fast," Ambassador Martinez said without preamble. She was an older woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. "The Korvax want weapons technology. The Vorkath are having an identity crisis, and everyone else is trying to figure out which side to take." "I didn't mean to start a political situation," Katie said miserably. "I just wanted to share useful technology." "Knowledge is never politically neutral," Martinez replied. "Especially knowledge that can be weaponized. We need to think very carefully about our next move." Amy pulled up security footage on her tablet. "It's worse than you think. Station intelligence detected Korvax operatives attempting to access the fabrication laboratory, where we did our demonstration. They're trying to steal the technology. Can they?" Danny asked worriedly. Katie shook her head. "Not really. They can see what materials we used, but without understanding the underlying principles, they'll just be copying blindly. And even if they figure it out, they'd need to develop entire manufacturing processes. It's not like you can just replicate one device and suddenly have the technology. That won't stop them from trying," Martinez said. "And it won't stop other species from pressuring us to share. We need to get ahead of this before it spirals out of control." Katie sat down, her mind racing. She'd come to this summit to present some minor research findings and learn from more advanced species. Instead, she'd accidentally triggered what might become an arms race. "What if we offer to share the technology openly?" she said suddenly. "Not exclusive to anyone. Available to everyone, but with conditions." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "What kind of conditions?"
"We establish a collaborative research program," Katie explained, the idea forming as she spoke.
Multiple species working together to develop civilian applications first. Fusion reactors, medical tools, industrial equipment, things that improve life across the galaxy. We set up ethical frameworks and oversight before anyone develops military applications. That way, no single species gets an advantage, and we ensure the technology is used responsibly. Danny nodded slowly. That could work. It would also mean no one species understands all of it. The Korvax can't steal what they'd need multiple species' expertise to use. It's risky, Martinez said. Collaborative projects on this scale are difficult to coordinate, and there's no guarantee that military applications won't be developed anyway. No, Katie agreed, but it's better than an arms race or letting the Korvax monopolize it. And honestly, I think a lot of species would prefer cooperation to competition. They've been stuck on this problem for so long because they were all working in isolation. Amy was quiet, then spoke up. There's precedent for this. The Galactic Medical Consortium works on a similar model, multiple species collaborating on healthcare technology, with strict ethical guidelines. It's not perfect, but it functions. Martinez considered for a long moment. All right. I'll draft a proposal for the summit tomorrow. Katie, you'll need to present it. This was your breakthrough, so it needs to come from you. That night, Katie couldn't sleep. She stood at the observation window in her quarters, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 8 billion humans were going about their lives, completely unaware that the future of galactic technology sharing might depend on whether one engineer could convince hundreds of alien species to work together. Her tablet chimed with an incoming message. To her surprise, it was from Krenthvar, requesting a private meeting. They met in one of the station's garden areas, a space filled with plants from dozens of worlds. Krenthvar had to navigate carefully to avoid crushing the smaller vegetation with his massive bulk. I wanted to speak with you away from the politics, he said without preamble. To apologize, Katie blinked in surprise. Apologize? For what? For my initial hostility. For assuming that because your species is young in galactic terms, you had nothing to teach. I have been forging metals for 300 of your years. I have trained thousands of engineers. And in all that time I became convinced that the Vorkath way was the only correct way. The summit chamber felt different on the fourth day. The atmosphere had shifted from academic curiosity to something more intense. Political alliances were forming in real time, and Katie could see the careful positioning as she walked to the podium. Delegates who had been friendly yesterday were now sitting with different groups. The Korvax military contingent had grown. Their representatives clustered in one section like a dark cloud. Ambassador Martinez gave Katie a final nod of encouragement before she began. Thank you all for gathering. Katie started, trying to keep her voice steady. Over the past few days, there's been a lot of discussion about plasma containment technology and what it means for the galaxy. I've heard concerns about military applications, about economic disruption, about cultural identity. These are all valid concerns. She pulled up a holographic display showing a proposed organizational structure. That's why I'd like to propose the formation of the Collaborative Applied Physics Initiative. This would be a joint research program involving any species that wishes to participate, with the goal of developing civilian applications of plasma containment technology before any military uses are explored. A ripple of conversation moved through the hall. Katie pressed on. The initiative would focus on 3 primary areas: improved fusion reactor designs for power generation, precision medical instruments for surgery and treatment, and industrial processing equipment for manufacturing. These applications would benefit everyone and establish ethical frameworks before we even consider military implications. A Zentari delegate rose, their crystalline body reflecting the chamber lights. This sounds admirable in theory, human Katie. But how would you prevent military development? Once the knowledge exists, species will pursue whatever applications they desire. You're right, Katie acknowledged. We can't prevent it entirely, but we can create a framework where military applications are developed transparently, with input from multiple species, rather than in secret by one empire seeking advantage over others. The goal isn't to stop progress. It's to ensure that progress benefits everyone. Thexmorn stood abruptly. This is nothing but human idealism disguised as practical policy. You ask us to share our expertise, pool our resources, and trust that everyone will act in good faith. The galaxy doesn't work that way. Species compete. It's natural law. Before Katie could respond, Krenthvar rose to his full imposing height. My colleague Thexmorn speaks of natural law. Let me speak of actual law, the principles that govern successful engineering. The strongest structure is not the one built by a single hand, but the one built by many hands working together. The most resilient system is not the one with the strongest single component, but the one where multiple components support each other. He turned to address the full chamber. For 3,000 years, the Vorkath have pursued excellence in isolation. We believed our methods were sufficient. But human Katie has shown us that isolation breeds blindness. Yes, working together is difficult. Yes, it requires trust. But the alternative is an arms race that benefits no one except weapons manufacturers. Thexmorn's expression darkened. You have been seduced by one clever demonstration, Krenthvar. You shame our people's legacy. I honor our people's legacy, Krenthvar replied firmly, by ensuring we remain relevant in a changing galaxy. Our ancestors taught us to forge metals. They did not teach us to fear new forges. The chamber erupted in debate. Katie stood at the podium, watching species argue among themselves. The Centauri and the Lumen delegates seemed supportive. The Chithar were discussing it intensely, but the Korvax section remained ominously silent, their commander watching everything with calculating eyes. After several minutes, the moderator managed to restore order. We will vote on the human proposal in 2 days, the Lumen announced. This will give delegations time to consult with their governments and consider implications. As Katie left the podium, she was immediately surrounded by delegates asking questions. Danny and Amy ran interference, politely but firmly creating space for her to breathe. Ambassador Martinez appeared at her side. You did well, the ambassador said quietly. But we have a problem. Station security just informed me that there was another attempted breach of the fabrication laboratory last night. More sophisticated this time. The Korvax? Katie asked. Can't prove it, but seems likely. They want this technology, and they want it exclusively. Your proposal threatens that goal. They made their way back to the human quarters through corridors filled with delegates engaged in heated discussions. The summit had transformed from an academic conference into something much more significant. In the operations room, Amy had set up multiple displays showing communication intercepts and movement tracking. The Korvax are up to something, she said without preamble. Increased encrypted communications, personnel movements that don't match normal patterns. Station security is on alert, but they're stretched thin with all the extra delegates. Katie studied the displays, feeling out of her depth. She was an engineer, not a spy or a military strategist. What do you think they're planning? Best guess? They'll try to steal enough information to replicate your demonstration independently. Then they can claim they developed it themselves and don't need to participate in your collaborative initiative. But they can't, Danny protested. They don't understand the underlying principles. They'd just be copying blindly. Doesn't matter if they understand it, Amy said. If they can make it work even partially, they can use that to undermine Katie's proposal. They can say the technology isn't unique to humans, so there's no reason for collaborative development. Katie felt frustration building. This wasn't how science was supposed to work. Knowledge should be shared, not hoarded or stolen. But she was learning that in the real world of galactic politics, pure scientific idealism didn't survive contact with species' competing interests. What if we gave them what they want? She said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. Not exclusively, Katie clarified. But what if we released the core technical information publicly right now? Put it out there for anyone to access. That removes the Korvax motivation to steal it, because there'd be nothing secret left to steal. Martinez frowned. That's a bold move. Once it's public, we lose any leverage for negotiating the collaborative framework. Do we, though? Katie argued. Think about it. The information alone isn't enough. We proved that in the laboratory. You need expertise from multiple disciplines to make practical applications. Humans understand ceramic engineering, but we'd benefit enormously from Vorkath metallurgy, Centauri energy field manipulation, Lumen computational modeling. Publishing the basics doesn't give anyone a complete solution. It just makes the case for collaboration stronger. Amy nodded slowly. It's risky, but it might work. If the Korvax can't claim exclusive access, they lose their main bargaining position. They'd have to choose between joining the collaborative initiative or being left behind while everyone else works together. It could also backfire, Martinez warned. Some species might see it as humans giving away their only valuable contribution. They might question why they should collaborate if they can just access the information freely. Because having information isn't the same as having knowledge, Katie said. I can give someone the recipe for steel, but that doesn't make them a blacksmith. The collaboration isn't about holding information hostage. It's about combining different areas of expertise to achieve things none of us could do alone. They debated for another hour before Martinez made the decision. All right, we'll do it. Katie, prepare a complete technical document explaining the principles and methods. We'll release it at tomorrow's session, before anyone expects it. Let's see how the galaxy responds when we refuse to play their hoarding games. Katie worked through the night, compiling everything she knew about ceramic-based plasma containment. She included the theoretical foundations, material compositions, manufacturing processes, and practical applications. She even added notes about known limitations and areas needing further research. It was the most comprehensive technical paper she'd ever written. The next morning, she stood before the summit once again. But this time, instead of a proposal, she had a gift. Before we vote on the Collaborative Applied Physics Initiative, Katie announced, I'd like to share something with everyone here. She activated the holographic display, and a detailed technical document appeared, accessible to all delegates simultaneously. This contains everything Earth knows about plasma containment using ceramic and refractory materials. Theory, practice, methods, applications. It's freely available to every species in this chamber. Effective immediately. The silence was absolute. Delegates stared at the document, at Katie, at each other. No one seemed to know how to respond. Commander Vex Callis of the Korvax stood, his face unreadable. You simply give this away? With no conditions, no restrictions? The information is free, Katie confirmed. But information alone isn't enough to solve your problems. You still need expertise, manufacturing capability, testing facilities, and collaborative research to turn these principles into practical applications. That's what the initiative offers. Not exclusive access, but combined expertise. She looked directly at the Korvax commander. You could try to develop. 6 weeks had passed since Katie's dramatic release of the plasma containment information. The Galactic Engineering Summit had been extended indefinitely as the Collaborative Applied Physics Initiative took shape. What had started as one human engineer's demonstration had evolved into the largest joint scientific effort in modern galactic history. The prototype facility occupied an entire section of Kepler-7 station. Inside, engineers from 17 different species worked side by side, combining their unique expertise into something unprecedented. Katie walked through the facility, still amazed by what they'd built together. In one section, Vorkath metallurgists worked alongside human ceramic engineers, developing hybrid materials that combined the strength of stellar alloys with the thermal properties of refractory composites. In another area, Zentari technicians manipulated energy fields while Lumen computational specialists ran simulations that would have taken human computers years to complete. Danny met her at the central hub, looking exhausted but excited. We're ready for the demonstration. All systems check out. The reactor is performing beyond our projections. Any last-minute problems? Katie asked. Just nerves, Danny admitted. We're about to show the galaxy that collaborative engineering can achieve what isolated efforts couldn't. No pressure. Amy appeared from the security station. Delegates are gathering in the observation theater. Station security reports no unusual activity. The Korvax contingent is present, which is a good sign. Katie nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. This was it. The moment when they'd prove that her proposal wasn't just idealistic rhetoric, but practical reality. The observation theater was packed. Every major species had sent representatives to witness the demonstration. Katie spotted Krenthvar in the front row, his massive form taking up 3 standard seats. Beside him, surprisingly, sat Thexmorn. The Vorkath engineer who'd opposed the initiative had eventually joined when it became clear that his species would participate with or without him. Ambassador. Martinez gave Katie a thumbs up from the diplomatic section. Even Commander Vex Callis was present, his expression carefully neutral. Katie took her position at the control station, visible through the transparent barrier separating the reactor chamber from the observation area. Her hands moved across the interface, bringing systems online one by one. Thank you all for coming, she said, her voice transmitted to the theater. What you're about to see is the first fruit of collaborative effort. This fusion reactor combines human ceramic containment technology with Vorkath metallurgy, Centauri energy field manipulation, Lumen computational optimization, and contributions from 8 other species. No single civilization could have built this alone. Together, we've created something none of us could have imagined 6 weeks ago. She initiated the startup sequence. In the center of the chamber, a sphere of layered materials began to glow as it was heated. Magnetic fields, designed by Centauri engineers and refined by Lumen calculations, contained a growing plasma core. The temperature readouts climbed rapidly, 5,000 degrees, 10,000, 15,000, the point where conventional materials failed catastrophically. But the hybrid containment system held steady, its ceramic layers ablating in controlled patterns while the Vorkath alloy structural elements maintained integrity through the Centauri energy distribution network. 20,000 degrees. 25,000, the temperature at which fusion reactions became self-sustaining. Katie monitored the readouts, her team positioned at backup stations throughout the facility. Everything was within predicted parameters. The reactor was working exactly as designed. Then alarms started blaring. Katie's stomach dropped as she saw the readings. One of the magnetic field generators was failing, its output dropping rapidly. Without it, the plasma would breach containment. And while the system was designed with multiple safety backups, a failure during the first public demonstration would be disastrous. "We have a problem," she announced, keeping her voice steady. "Generator 3 is offline. Danny, redirect power from auxiliary systems. Amy, activate the backup containment protocol." But before they could respond, something unexpected happened. In the observation theater, Vex Callis stood and activated his communicator. "Korvax engineering team, you are authorized to assist." Katie blinked in surprise as 3 Korvax engineers rushed from the observation area into the facility. They moved with military precision, accessing systems that Katie hadn't even known they'd been studying. One of them called out, "The generator didn't fail. It's being sabotaged. Someone is sending interference signals through the station's power grid." Amy was already at a security terminal. "Confirmed. Tracking the signal source now. It's coming from Section 7, the Korvax delegation quarters." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Someone among the Korvax delegation was trying to sabotage the demonstration, but other Korvax were helping to stop it. Vex Callis's voice was ice cold. "Section 7 security. Apprehend anyone transmitting unauthorized signals. Authorization code Vex Prime Alpha." Katie didn't have time to process the politics. The reactor was still active, still climbing in temperature, and they were seconds away from a containment breach. "Can you compensate for the interference?" The Korvax engineer at the generator worked frantically. "Not completely. We need to reduce the plasma density or the remaining generators won't hold it." Katie made a split-second decision. Reduce input flow by 30%. Let the reaction stabilize at a lower temperature. We can still demonstrate containment even if we don't hit maximum output. Dexmorn's voice came through the communication system from the observation theater. "Human Katie, wait. There's another option." He was standing now, working on his own tablet. "I'm sending you modified field equations. The Vorkath developed these for stellar forge applications. They should strengthen the remaining generators enough to maintain full containment." Data flooded Katie's display. Lumen computational specialists immediately began analyzing it. "The equations are valid," one of them confirmed. "Implementing them would increase generator efficiency by 18%, sufficient to compensate for the offline unit." "Do it," Katie ordered. The team worked in perfect synchronization. Human engineers adjusted containment parameters. Vorkath specialists reconfigured the structural supports. Centauri technicians modified the energy fields. Lumen analysts optimized every variable in real time. And Korvax engineers isolated the sabotage while maintaining system stability. The reactor temperature stabilized at 28,000 degrees. Fusion reactions achieved full self-sustaining output. The containment system held steady, now operating on principles that represented the combined knowledge of multiple civilizations. In the observation theater, delegates watched in stunned silence as the readouts showed stable operation. This wasn't just a successful demonstration. It was a real-time example of collaborative problem-solving under pressure. Katie allowed herself a small smile. Reactor operating at 94% of projected output. All containment systems stable. Fusion reaction self-sustaining. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings of all species, I present the first collaborative fusion reactor. The theater erupted in applause, cheers, and various alien expressions of approval. Even Vex Callus was nodding, a slight smile on his usually stern face. Over the next hour, they demonstrated the reactor's capabilities. It produced clean energy far more efficiently than any existing design. The containment system showed the predicted controlled degradation without catastrophic failure. And most importantly, it proved that the collaborative model worked, even under crisis conditions. After the demonstration, station security brought in the saboteurs. They were junior Korvax military officers, acting on orders from hardliners back in the Empire who opposed any collaborative initiative. Commander Vex Callus dealt with them personally, his expression grim. This was not authorized, he told Katie and the assembled delegates. There are factions in the Empire that fear change, that believe strength comes only from dominance. They are wrong. What I witnessed today proves that true strength comes from unity of purpose. He turned to address the broader assembly. The Korvax Empire officially joins the Collaborative Applied Physics Initiative. We will contribute our engineering capabilities and manufacturing resources, and we will work with all participating species to ensure this technology benefits everyone, not just military applications. It was a remarkable turnaround. The species that had most threatened to weaponize the technology was now committing to peaceful collaboration. Over the following weeks, more species joined the initiative. The Galactic Engineering Council formally established what became known as the Sullivan Accord, named after Katie despite her protests. The Accord created frameworks for rapid technology sharing while including ethical safeguards and transparent development processes. Krenthvar and Katie co-authored a landmark paper detailing the integration of Vorkath metallurgy with human ceramic engineering. It became required reading in engineering programs across dozens of worlds. The collaborative reactor design was licensed freely to any species wanting to build fusion power plants. Within 6 months, the first production facilities were manufacturing the hybrid containment materials. Within a year, fusion power plants based on